Hey, we'll call the meeting to order. Roll call.
All right. Commissioner Bidwell,
Here.
Commissioner Corbett,
Here.
Commissioner Wire,
Here.
Commissioner Shaw,
Here.
Mayor Lindsay.
Here. You have before you the agenda for this evening.
I'd like to remove the item number 11, authorizing mayor to sign the Verizon wireless contract. I'll just remove that from the agenda.
Okay. Any questions from anyone? Okay, do we have a motion to adopt the agenda as amended?
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Under unfinished business, approve second reading of ordinance 1657, amend appendix B, zoning section 17.02. Jameson, would you want to address that?
This is second reading of ordinance to rezone the property for the flower shop out on the bypass. There have been no changes since the last meeting. This item did receive recommendation for approval from the planning commission. The ordinance will rezone the property from R90 single family residential to agricultural. Staff recommend approval.
Okay. Okay, any questions or comments?
Did we skip the consent calendar or did I just?
We just did it with.
I thought we. approved
No,
the
you
agenda.
are, we approved the amended. You are absolutely correct.
I mean, it doesn't really matter to me.
You are
There's a
absolutely
big chunk
correct.
of business there.
So we will come right back to that right after this.
You're looking for a motion still.
Looking for a motion on number one, approve second reading on ordinance 1657.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar as amended?
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Under new business, adopt resolution 2023-16. Provide for the creation of tax increment district number 6. And Jameson, do you or Brooke
Sure.
want to address this? Or
Thank you,
both?
Mr. Mayor. So TIF district number 6 would establish a district around the properties on the eastern side of our industrial park, including Global Polymer and their addition, the Fox Promo building, a site where there's proposed contractor condos, and then the vacant properties still in the industrial park. And the project plan before you today would both approve and create that TIF district number 6, as well as set in motion some plans for funding to go to the Lake Area Improvement Corporation, which would be used for the purposes of a child care facility. There's been a lot of great discussion and questions on those the last few days, and in particular today, something that I think was emphasized as we're having these discussions is that this project plan kind of gives the tool to the LAIC to use for addressing our critical needs in childcare. But there would be a developers agreement that would come at a later date, which would set a lot more of the guidelines for what that would look like, including timeline for what ATIF could be structured. So I'll start with that as an overview. We do have Brooke and looks like a whole cohort from the LAIC and Toby Morris without his voice, but still here nonetheless to help us answer any questions regarding TIF.
Thank you. Toby and Brooke, would you join us? For the benefit of the commission and the general public, can you give a little more overview on the ideas that you have moving forward?
Yeah, you bet. Brooke Rolog, executive director for the Lake Area Improvement Corporation. I think Jason did a great job describing what we're looking to do here. The LAIC predating me has done a phenomenal job building out the industrial park to where it is today. Now it's our job to continue to support that workforce. One way we view supporting that workforce is through childcare. One day when I was in a childcare conference, it clicked that really the only way to move the needle is if we start viewing childcare a little differently. And if we view it as a necessary infrastructure for moms and dads to go to work, we could really make an impact by the utilization of a TIF. So just like any other street, water, sewer, it's necessary. It's absolutely necessary for moms and dads to go to work. So that's one way we supporting all of the great work done in the industrial park. So there's an opportunity with Global's expansion. And so we're excited that we have their support to move forward with the TIF district expansion.
One of the things that was interesting for me this weekend, and that is I was visiting our daughter in Bozeman. Mary is director of special ed department for the Bozeman Public High Schools. The high schools in Bozeman have a child care center built onto the high school for the teachers. So teachers in the district and that have a place to bring their children and that for childcare while they're teaching. And it was interesting to see, and Mary said it's very, very positive. And then the other thing is if you've listened to much of the news lately and that, you'll see that childcare is being discussed nationally, you know, as something that needs to be addressed and really affects 20% of the workforce, is that so.
Yeah, it's an interesting time too. There's more childcare centers closing their doors than opening them, but we feel it's just necessary to keep moving forward and trying to find unique ways to for solutions.
Questions, comments?
Mayor, if I may, see how long this lasts. What this is before you is a step. It's not a solution. It's a way of bringing further steps that need to come. As a partnership, you have the county here supporting it, the school supports it, the communities. Wow, the community supports it. It's not liability to the city. It's not, as Honey and I talked, great questions. Is it a blank check? No, it's an opportunity to write a check, for the greater infrastructure of the city. As the advisor to the city, as one who's done a lot of the TIFs, there's no liability. There's the plan. It has to come forward. It's going to take probably a year. Wow, this is getting really bad. It's going to take a year to bring that forward. So I applaud you on moving that needle one step forward, but by no means is it a solution at this time.
No, and sometimes you gotta be creative and think outside the box in order to get things accomplished, and this is definitely a way of at least starting to move that needle forward. And so I, for one, and that supported wholeheartedly. And so, from the commission, any questions or comments? I'm gonna open up public. Anyone with questions or comments from the public?
I think I probably fall underneath there, as Toby and I discussed earlier. You said this is essentially a piece. If this doesn't come to fruition, there's no obligation for the city to continue. If the plans and the infrastructure and how the funds are going to be spent still has to come back to the city for approval, correct?
I did attend the planning commission meeting this morning, the special planning commission meeting. Great way to start Monday, and they supported it, recommended it, the city approved it.
This is maybe to a preliminary discussion, but as far as ongoing operating costs of the city, we have a tendency to adopt projects that other people start, and then we end up maintaining and finishing and continuing to fund those long term. Has there been a lot of discussion on the actual operating ongoing thoughts with this?
Yeah, there's been a lot of conversation at it, with what that, one is the facility, right? It's just one step at a time. And so, but two, you're absolutely right. We know there's operational deficits in most childcare centers that are, leading to doors closed in the future. So we're well aware of it. And the goal is to make foundational decisions that will have a lasting impact. So hopefully we don't run into that same problem, but we do know and are well aware that there will likely run a deficit year over year.
I'd like to comment, on, we've done numerous surveys and different Eric here will probably get into it a little bit too. You know, a common theme that comes up in our community is daycare, housing, and, what are you, I don't wanna steal your thunder here, what are your other takeaways? Streets.
Daycare housing, I mean, streets, well, we can always talk about the survey and feedback from that and say, you know, maybe a bad winter might be to contribute for that, but. Daycare housing, retail, food options, those are the big things that always show up in terms of critical needs right now.
So that's what we're addressing here with this tip.
Do you anticipate using these funds for anything other or in addition to the construction of this facility?
I don't. I think it would be a good way to chip at that bigger goal. I mean, a 10,000 square foot facility to accommodate the need of approximately 125 kiddos, which was done, you know, with the citywide series are phenomenal. They tell us what the community thinks they need, but then we follow that with a feasibility study so that we can quantify what the true need is. So when those two are matching up, we have a really strong indication. Yes, I mean, that facility will be no less than $3 million. So I can see that being utilized well and to its full capacity quickly to jumpstart the infrastructure of the facility.
And what you're seeing too more and more is besides the parents, you know, paying for childcare and that businesses that employ people are also looking at it, you know, from their standpoint that, you know, if this person isn't at work, it costs us this. And if they can be at work and we can help by chipping in some, you're seeing more and more companies in that are looking at doing that. And so that gives Madison that opportunity as well.
I'd reiterate that too. We have some phenomenal in-home daycares in Madison, but that is what we have. A lot of those providers are looking at sunsetting their businesses. Alongside that, when we came through a pandemic, for one, when those providers couldn't provide those services, those daycares just closed down, leaving people who had daycare to not be able to work at that point. A daycare center would stay open longer hours and would be able to maintain an open door even if one person couldn't report to work. So there'd be less scrambling in the mornings or having the domino effect of because that daycare is not open, then the next 3 people can't go to work.
Well, and we have, I believe it's Envy in Sioux Falls that, you know, has been working like that and with, you know, people and corporations and that. So we've got, you know, people to look toward.
And I should have done a better job. We did invite Caroline Jens. She is our child care consultant. The LAIC is engaged with child care help biz or child care help biz. Sorry, did I say that right, Caroline?
Child care biz help.
Thank you so much. But we're just really excited. We had brought her on board, I think the beginning of April it was, and the amount of work that she's helped move this project along is absolutely incredible. So
Are there any comments that she would like to add?
I would like to add that, you know, we have been working with childcare centers in South Dakota and all over the US. And yes, the infrastructure of childcare is a priority for every state in the United States. And anything that we can do to help our communities orchestrate that infrastructure is something that we're very passionate about. And like one of someone in the audience had mentioned, you know, your home daycare providers, many of them are going to be retiring. And the subsidized rates to help support childcare in South Dakota are very low. So by offering a facility to a partner at a cost that's a lot less than if they would have to build it, makes this situation actually viable. And we're going to do whatever it takes to help find that partner and help make sure that this construction project comes in, you know, under budget.
Very good. Other questions or comments? Pete,
Yeah,
yes, if you can come a little bit closer so people at home can hear. There you go.
Well, this is really exciting for us. And this is what,
you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Pete Gustav. I've lived here my whole life. I'm at Global
Global Polymer.
Global
Yes.
Polymer, and we have agreed to waive our discretionary tax that we're gonna get property tax with the county, so you get the full amount right away on our expansion. And we're gonna support all of what this childcare thing. This is a public-private partnership. I don't know if everybody realizes, but childcare, like technical education, like a lot of other things, is economic development. Without, we have serious issues that we were even looking a long time ago when I first talked about doing it ourselves. We're gonna need to add 150 or so employees over the next 24 months. And I know that Manitou's got the same issue that they're expanding and gonna hire. And you gotta think about, you got this economic development park out there. Could you handle a company that wanted to move in here and offer 200 more jobs? Could you take care of their children? Could they recruit the people and have the places to stay? So what you guys are working on is critical for this community to move forward. And to Roy's point about the mayor's point, sorry, Roy, the mayor's point about, you know, what's going on in Bozeman, and I've been all across the country and I'm seeing the same thing. In every town, it's a hindrance for them to be able to expand and recruit people. And if somebody doesn't show up, you can't hire them. We've had numerous people that we couldn't hire that were from out of the community, engineers and so forth, because we didn't have childcare plus housing. Those are always the two issues we run against. And so what is happening here in these public-private partnerships and innovative thinking is going to be what separates Madison from the other communities around, and what we can do as a group together and work together as a group to move this forward. So we're really excited about it, and we'll continue to do whatever we can to support it. Any questions for me?
Question?
Thank you, guys.
Anyone else?
What are the next steps, Brooke? So hypothetically, we pass it. Then what?
Then we launch a capital campaign. We look at what that difference is of what the TIF financing can provide for the facility. And then we look at what the true cost is gonna be. So we have RFPs out to, not quite yet, but we'll look to disperse all the RFPs to multiple builders that would be interested in the facility. RFPs to partners, potential partners for the operators. LAIC isn't in the childcare operating business. We need to stay in our lane, but we're doing our best to attract a partnership that is provide quality, accessible childcare for the community. So recruit recruit partners, operators, and then finish off the financing. I think it's important to note that this is just one piece of multiple puzzles when it comes to the funding structure.
Other questions?
Yeah, and it provides, the way I look at it from my stance, it also provides us a segue for our educational institution to partner with the daycare. We're putting in a program next year that is going to fast track kids into early childhood education. So that facility would be able to help build our partnerships and get our kids to the finish line faster, so that we keep people employed in there too.
I have to watch what I say sometimes because I utilize words like daycare, and it's actually early childhood education centers or schools and teachers. And so it's a different view of enrichment that I think we in South Dakota are probably just a little bit unique. How we do that.
So as I understand it tonight, assuming we approve, we're establishing the district, and then a later time we'll get like a developers agreement to come that has the finer points with terms. Correct, Moms?
Yeah. You gotta strike when the iron's hot.
Absolutely, that's the best time.
Yeah.
Right?
And don't get burned.
Or we could just beat our heads against the wall.
We could keep talking about it. We could just keep talking about the child care initiative.
And it's something that's been talked about for years, and it's nice to see that there may be a pathway to get started. You know, and really make it come to fruition.
Caroline, did I miss any steps? I know I kind of rattled them off, but you probably, she's the one that provided me with the steps that we're going to be taking, so I should have diverted that question to you. My apologies.
No, you did a great job. We have to find, other donors that are willing to sponsor and kind of invest into this. We have to find our builder that's going to help, put those walls up. And we're trying to build that relationship with the right childcare partner that's going to meet the needs of your target market. And that's really it in a nutshell.
Other questions or comments?
Make a motion to adopt resolution 2023-16, provide for the creation of tax increment district number 6.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Thank you all for your continued support.
Well, and thank you, everyone, because it's something that's definitely needed, no question.
Yeah.
Number
Thank you.
2. Thank you. Approve agreement with PE Group for services related to the street department shop renovation project. Jameson, do you want to address that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So to introduce this topic, we have to back up a little bit to some discussions we had last year during the budget season. And one of the projects that we had brought forward in the budget season was to do some renovation or improvements to our public workshop, which houses our streets and parks departments and other equipment and personnel. So that building has reached the end of its life, or it's gotten to the point where it needs some love and some work on it. A lot of the siding on the outside is beginning to rust. I'm actually kind of surprised that some of it didn't blow away in the Rachel we had a year ago. And there's certainly other issues and deficiencies throughout the entire building. So our discussion at that time was what to do with it. We decided we wanted to replace the siding and the steel roofing on the top. And then we felt that could ensure that facility could be used for several more decades in its current condition. So we budgeted some funds to do that. And then as we've gotten into it, we realized it has gotten more complicated. So since the scope's been changing in that project, we wanted to bring, I guess, this back to you for an update and then action before moving forward. So the main reason that the scope's been changing on this is because of the wiring for the building, which of course is reaching the end of its life as well, is attached directly into the roof. So in order to replace the roof, you have to deal with the wiring and electrical as well. So now is the time to do that. And if we're replacing all the electrical, then we need to be engaging with the professional who can look at it and design the improvement to have that bid out. Of course, this would all put the project well above what we had budgeted for it. So our intent at this point would be to move forward with the agreement with PE Group, knowing that at some point we'll have to decide how much of the project improvement can be done yet this year in 2023, and how much would need to be finished in a future year. Do I have any staff that would have anything to add? Gary, Ryan, Claire's Mud?
I guess the only thing I'd add.
Ryan, if you wouldn't mind coming
Come on,
forward,
Ryan, you know better.
it makes it easier for people at home.
Yeah, exactly. No, the only thing I would add is I think that the dollar amount that PE Group had assessed to this work is reasonable. I would consider that a reasonable amount of work. And that would provide the full gamut, provide the design as well as some oversight of the construction as well. So that's really what we're needing.
Thank you. That's a good point I was missing. The fixed cost is $10,953 in this contract.
We're familiar with Mark and his group. They did the pool. I mean, they've done work
Yeah,
for us. They know what we expect.
yeah, they've done a great job.
I'll make a motion to approve agreement with PE Group for services related to street department shop renovation project.
1 second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Discuss the draft of 2023 to 2026 city strategic plan. Eric, do you want to address that?
As Eric's making his way up, the background I provide in this is the city has engaged with Ask, a rural economic development firm, to construct a 3-year strategic plan. This is, to my knowledge, been the first comprehensive strategic plan the city has done. I think that Ask has done a fantastic job of incorporating public feedback and getting engagement across our community before putting pen to paper. And now we do have some draft plan before us today. And the intent would be to gather final feedback from the commission in this formal environment with a final draft to be presented at the next commission meeting on June 5th. For me or anybody else that would like a copy, I can get this printed off or sent over to you. Eric, go.
Awesome. Hey, everybody. Glad to be with you.
Yes.
My name is Eric Bucky. I am the founder, managing partner, or one of the 4 managing partners of PASC. As Jameson mentioned, PASC is a rural economic development consulting firm. Our HQ is in Burke. We have 4 partners spread around the state. I am based in Sioux Falls. But our backgrounds are all from rural South Dakota, so we're all from small communities. I have some personal connections to Madison as well, so it's nice to be involved in this process. But what I want to at least talk through tonight is what was presented in front of you, which is an outline for some strategies for the 2023-2026 strategic plan. So give you some background of how we came here. We began the engagement with the city back in December. We had started forming a steering committee at the start of 2023. Steering committee members are a few of them in the room, Mayor Lindsay, Jameson, Commissioner Shaw, but then we also had Rick Dorlag with LAIC, Stacey Cruzmark with Dakota State, Joel Jorgensen with the school district. We also had Tammy Miller with Madison Regional, Eric Hortness with the chamber. So covered a good group of folks that had a pretty good feel for how the city operated and what we can do together. And so what our project looked like to get you to this point was primarily over the past 2 or 3 months, we've been doing a fair amount of community engagement. So for those who are tuning in, who are not as familiar with the process, PASC took a sort of 3-pronged approach to community feedback. We did a full-scale community survey. We did a series of discussion groups with groups within the community who may not be traditionally included in these types of plans. And then we did stakeholder interviews, particularly with organizational leaders throughout the community. And so if you add up all the numbers, I just recalculated today, we had a little over 800 people engaged in the process. And so 629 people responded to the survey. We had 8 discussion groups, 23 stakeholder interviews, and then for our agreement, 3 community feedback sessions. 1 was city employees, and then 2 that were open to the general public, 1 hosted at the Dakota Prairie Playhouse, and then 1 at Madison High School. So very thorough with our community engagement. I think we should be very happy with the amount of folks that were engaged in the process. And I think what's come together then is what's in front of you, which is sort of the draft strategies we're looking at for the plan itself. So I kind of get a kick out of it. I try to make sure, and I said this to Jameson, we tried to go for brevity. Still have 23 pages of strategies. So I promise this will be in the appendix. But what's coming from here, first and foremost, is there's still more to the plan. So by the time we get to the June 5th commission meeting, you'll see the full plan come together in terms of introduction strategies, some of the boilerplate things that'll describe how the plan was designed in the proposal we shared with you, but then all the way through an economic-based analysis and analysis of 5-tiered communities from throughout the region, both in Iowa, Minnesota, and South Dakota. And then the summary of all the data that came from the community. So obviously, we're not going to identify names. So again, if you're tuning in online and you're curious, the community survey data will all be aggregated so that folks are not identified in the process. That's brought us here tonight, which is what I'm sharing with you tonight is an outline of a vision statement for the city strategic plan, as well as principles for development, and then a series of strategies we can look at together. We can go into as much or as little depth as you'd like. Of course, just want to make sure we're at least covering the high level version of the plan. What's been drafted at this point? One of the core pieces of the proposal was to get a vision statement and set of principles for development, which would guide strategies. So the vision statement that's been drafted at this point, based on the data specifically provided by the community, the city of Madison and its community partners seek to build the safest and most innovative, inclusive, livable, connected, and prosperous community in the Dakotas and surrounding region by providing all citizens with the opportunity to achieve social, cultural, and economic well-being, known as the magic of Madison. So you might have caught that. We're going for a little bit of a communication strategy here too. So that's the draft of the vision statement and the 5 principles of development we're looking at, trying to, again, make the themes as clear as possible for somebody reading the plan, while then looking at the descriptions. Theme 1, prioritize community engagement. How do we make sure we're connecting with citizens as much as possible? Number 2, strengthen collaboration. So focusing on collaboration between the city and community and educational institutions to achieve this plan, as well as the other plans and strategies that are in place. Address critical needs. We heard one of them tonight, talking a lot about housing, childcare, and retail services that have been voiced consistently. And I say consistently ad nauseum by the citizens through every form of community engagement possible. Number 4, enhanced quality of life, focusing on a higher potential for retail, entertainment, and recreational opportunities, specifically focusing on downtown, the lakes, and community attractions. Then lastly, building a culture of belonging for all citizens, a really critical piece that showed up in the survey data, particularly within the ESL community of Madison, was their feelings of how calm and safe Madison is as a community. So continuing to build on that sense of safety. Partners in the plan, as I mentioned, will be named in each strategy. So you would see, as you read through every recommended strategy by theme, you'll see a strategy owner. So one institution of that plan will be sort of the spearhead of that. And then depending on the strategy itself, you may have instances where, for example, the first strategy of goal 1, deepen investment in the personal professional development of the city of Madison employees and elected officials. That one's on you guys. I won't add the other partners into that one. So with that being said, before I dive into every goal and strategy, knowing that, again, from a higher level theme, you're talking about principles of development, broken down into goals, broken down into strategies and outcomes. Are there any questions before I dive into that?
Okay, one comment I'd make is, I think with the strategic planning process, there's always gonna be things that you find that you know you're gonna see. Daycare, we just had a great discussion on housing, streets, retail. These are the things that we're not surprisingly come up. We're close to the community and we know that. And there's always things that surprise you a little bit too. And you've seen the kind of the magic of Madison being determined here. And that wasn't something that HASC came up with. It was something they observed or identified, but there was, multiple times where they had this feedback from the community and the word magic kept popping up. So you'll see how that kind of incorporated in the plan here a little bit, which I think is great to be able to see that connection with what our community members feel about the community and being able to incorporate the right into the plan.
Thanks, Jameson. What I'll do, I'll work through the goals, and to the extent that I can, I'm happy to answer questions on the specific strategies. But again, I won't read this for you. Just want to make sure I explain sort of the approach we took. When we talk about principle 1, first and foremost, increase community engagement. The theme was focusing on how to engage and proactively support community needs. And I think we've done a really fantastic job. I know I've been reading through many of the survey efforts that have been taken on, the plans that have been created already. And there's very much a commitment to that. I see that very, very clearly, and I hope you do too. I think through this process, what we saw in terms of community engagement is not just things that can be done to meet citizen needs through, again, things we talk about housing, childcare, talk about retail services. We're also talking about what does this mean for the city itself. And so we talked about theme 1 of increasing community engagement. Goal number 1 is deepen investment in personal professional development of employees and elected officials of the city of Madison. So approaching things like, for example, how do we make sure that we're enrolling City of Madison employees in some type of personality professional assessment to say, how do we give everybody a chance to understand their strengths, areas of development, and how they communicate with each other and improve productivity that way. Thinking about things like compensation plans, how do we continue to be above board in terms of benefits, knowing that that was a competitive marker that almost every employee we spoke to said, this is one of the things that we really enjoy about our employment with the City of Madison. But then thinking about annual recognition, when we talked about Madison Magic, and Jameson, I appreciate you bringing this up. Those are exact words used by citizens across the board, but also there is a kind of a sense of magic that City of Madison employees actually brought up themselves. And so the first goal is really focusing on, again, supporting City of Madison employees and their personal development, and continuing to stay competitive in terms of compensation and benefits, but then also establishing annual recognition for employees. That's goal number 1 of theme 1. Goal number 2, establish heightened brand and communication standards for the City of Madison that helps citizens connect its institutions with the magic of Madison. The long story short of this is in conversation with members of the steering committee, but also employees, as well as kind of hearing the voice used by citizens. It's become clear that there's an opportunity for some rebranding for the city itself, and thinking about how do you continue to elevate that brand and that commitment to say that Madison magic is real. There's something to this. And so how do we elevate and connect members of the community to that? And so what the recommended strategies focus on is a rebranding exercise for the city, as well as connected partners. So in this case, knowing that that would tie back into the Chamber of Commerce and LAIC in some capacity as well. And then again, setting up essentially infrastructure for the city to have a more coordinated communication strategy focused on facts that brand standard. Another piece to pull out of that goal, as well as to modernize MadisonSouthDakota.com. So how do we make sure that, knowing that it's a connecting hub for so many institutions in the community, not just the city, but also the school district, DSU, so on. How do we modernize that to make sure that it's ultimately meeting the goals of the city? And so that's goal number 2, is focusing on heightened brand and communication standards for the city and its partners. Goal number 3, and then I'll pause on theme 1, establish a town center for community engagement that allows citizens to share a common experience in Madison. Essentially, what's being proposed in this goal is understanding what are the public locations where citizens are able to gather in a large forum. A common theme that showed up in community surveys was that citizens were voicing a need for a larger engagement space where they feel like all members of the community can go to one place. There's definitely areas through the community when I think of like the Playhouse, or I think of the Field House as well, Madison High School, areas in the community where people congregate, but there might not be shared experiences. So for establishing a town center for community engagement means looking at within the community, what's a feasible place for folks to gather. And it could be, again, an indoor space, it could be an outdoor space. Essentially setting up a space for folks to say, we congregate here, this is a place where everybody comes together. And frankly speaking, when it comes to development goals, when you think about the downtown master plan, this is something that would integrate very nicely into that process as well. That's goal number 3 of theme 1, increase community engagement. Any questions before I move on? Okay, I'll move on then to theme number 2. Strengthen collaboration. Really, this covers a lot of different goals. It covers everything from enhancing the quote unquote town gown relationship between the city and DSU, as well as Madison School District. But then also looking at other partners in the community that the city can be enhancing relationships with. Goal number 1 is really kind of, in a lack of a better way of saying it, a love letter written by the students of Madison Central School District, as well as Dakota State University, where there's a way to increase Madison Central School District and Dakota State University promotion within community marketing and communication campaigns during the academic year. So when we elevate that goal, talking about communication standards and communication infrastructure, this goal is meant to add to that, to say, as part of the strategies taken on by the city, by the chamber, by LAIC, how do we integrate the school district and DSU in really simple ways? Could be things as simple as saying on a game day or the day of an activity, are there flags that businesses can fly for the respective institution? Are there ways to more clearly integrate updates and event information from the school district and from DSU into places like MadisonSouthDakota.com? Are there incentives that we can provide to businesses who are trying to actively support school districts, not just maybe in Madison, but even the surrounding area? That's really what that goal is focused on, is increasing that collaboration. So I'm scrolling here. Apologies. Goal number 2, create opportunities for staff, student, staff, and faculty voices to shape community policy and approaches to continuing economic and community development. Most of what this focuses on is, again, the simple thing is representation. How do we make sure that to the greatest extent possible that we're including students from DSU and MHS in this case in decisions, but also thinking in this case of continuing to integrate faculty and staff from those institutions in decision-making processes for the public. Much of that is coming from best practices we've reviewed from peer communities that we've researched that are similar in size or have similar facets to Madison, where think about a Marshall, Minnesota, or a Sioux Center, Iowa. Also communities with similar relationships in their community. How do we make sure that we're matching best practices and getting student voices elevated in that process? So that's really what this is focused on, as well as also including ways to say, how do staff and faculty continue to be included in not just You know, making sure there's representation in city commission. How are they represented in every board that we can possibly look at in this case? So that's another goal here to focus on. Number 3, assist local business leaders with career development pipelines and partnerships. Really, the focus of this goal is setting up strategies that continue to build upon the really successful work happening already at Madison Central School District, but also Dakota State, to make sure that we have a consistent workforce pipeline coming from those 2 institutions into the city of Madison. One survey point that was a little bit maybe disturbing to the average observer, when we had our discussion group of DSU students, none of them said they were planning to stay immediately after college. But it's not because they didn't want to stay. At this point, almost half of them actually were considering finding a way to return back to Madison at some point in time. So there's a desire to stay. There's maybe at times not necessarily an understanding of what my opportunities are after I graduate. And so goal number 3 is really meant to help address that and make sure that students here have an opportunity to see themselves at Madison, not just immediately after graduation, but in the long term. Goal number 4, provide community support for the pillars and goals of the 2027 DSU strategic plan. That plan was just released within the past few months. Really what this focuses on is, again, how do we continue to strengthen that relationship, and knowing that in I guess forefront of mind, their focus at this point with the strategic plan is increasing availability of faculty for their very competitive programs, but also increasing the student base. For the city, what I would encourage folks to look at with this part of the strategic plan is how do we make sure that we're assisting new employees coming into the city, make that a part of the strategy for economic development. I think the steps taken tonight with the TIF district is a really great start to that process, but also thinking of, again, how do we collectively build that partnership again with DSU to make sure we're constantly thinking about that. The other thing to keep in mind is that they're planning to increase their student base by 15% to 3,700 students. A lot of students come to town. So when we think of strategies for, again, community development, we're going to have to consider student support goals as part of the work that's happening here too. So that's what goal number 4 focuses on. Goal number 5 is probably one you've probably heard quite a bit of, making sure that we're finishing the work that's been started on eliminating ongoing flood risk for Madison citizens. So essentially, how can we make sure that we're prioritizing the capital improvement plans proposals for reducing flood risk? There's not much else to that. Really, it's focusing on how to make sure that we're addressing that flood risk as quickly as possible. Last 2 goals for this, goal number 6, support Lake County in efforts to complete critical infrastructure and increase financial capacity of county through available policy efforts. Really, I think what's laudable is that there are partnerships that are growing to enhance capacities of Lake County, particularly when I think of the Highway 34 bypass. Really, this goal is focused on how can the city be an active partner in supporting the county's development, because at this point, as the city continues to grow and we see influx of students and workforce into the community, that partnership with Lake County will be absolutely essential. Goal number 7, last one of this theme, is continuing management of all strategic plans of Madison community through the City of Madison Strategic Plan Steering Committee and broad partnerships. Probably goes without saying, it's maybe a way of saying it's a plan to a plan. How do we make sure that we're continuing the work on this plan, knowing that these goals are really priorities for the city, but then also how to make sure we're adding partners as they're needed. So one of the strategies, this was maybe a miss on our end in this case, was making sure that we're integrating Lake County into this work. Or for example, one of the goals we'll talk about shortly is how do we increase engagement in terms of a downtown association or some sort of staffing for that. So bringing those perspectives into the city strategic plan, but then also looking at knowing that you have a capital improvement plan, a housing plan, a land use plan. How are we making sure that those are all coordinated and speaking the same language and that your goals are being achieved? And so this kind of gives some strategies for achieving that process. So again, pause. Any questions before I continue?
You're doing great.
Good.
Theme 3, address critical needs. Most of these are not surprises. These are just, again, we're going back to, these are priorities for the city and for its development. Goal 1, create programs that sustain and connect residents with safe, affordable, and modernized housing that align with historical preservation standards and the existing Madison housing plan. Pretty straightforward. Really just saying how to make sure that we're promoting those tools that allow for historical preservation, maintenance, facade improvements. How do we make sure that to the extent we can, that we're addressing any safety and nuisance property code, whether it needs to be reviewed, whether it needs to be enhanced in enforcement, whatever that looks like. But then some other things that seem to be coming up, particularly from the steering committee members. How do we make sure that we're establishing a housing listing on MadisonSouthDakota.com or some sort of centralized hub for folks in the city to find housing? Particularly that was raised as a need by students. They're looking for rental property. And then lastly, how do we create a working group of local and regional developers and contractors, making sure that we're understanding their needs as an industry so we can be adaptive and proactive when we're talking about large scale housing projects that may be needed in the future. Goal number 2. I'll just turn to Brooke and say, this is yours. Goal number 2, sustain a comprehensive approach to community childcare through development of a community daycare center, as well as priority and incentives for attracting and supporting childcare providers. I think goal 1 of that has been already addressed. So I think we're in a good place for that. Really, I think the additions for strategies over the next 3 years, consider childcare requirement thresholds for new housing developments. If you reach a certain level of housing, you probably should be considering where you might need childcare in this case. But then lastly, how do you continue to build on the work that's happening already at LAIC in the long term? So what strategies need to be addressed there?
Yeah, I think on that one as well, like Sonia mentioned, I think it's not one and done, right?
Okay, if you wouldn't mind, thank you.
I think Sonia had mentioned it in one of her questions, but I think it's important with the childcare. It's really not a one and done. I mean, I think from now until very far in the future, it'll be a part of economic development. It'll be a part of our initiative to keep a pulse on where we're at for childcare. So,
Perfect.
anyway, it's newer, in my opinion, that childcare is a part of economic development. But how do we not only, try to find solutions today, but really to the unforeseeable future?
Thanks, Brooke.
Thank you.
Goal number 3 of theme 3, addressing critical needs. Incentivize and seek development of retail centers that address known needs communicated by Madison residents of all walks of life, focus on food and clothing. This one was interesting. We're going through community survey data. It was very resounding that folks were looking for enhanced food options in a wide sense of the word. So both in terms of grocery, but then also looking in terms of late night food options, but also variety of food options. And so what this goal really seeks to address is not just that piece, but then also something maybe critical in this case, which is a lot of folks expressing desire for another retail goods store. So thinking of clothing, particularly sporting goods. Actually heard quite a few folks say we love a men's clothing store in the city of Madison. And so what strategies are really focused on in goal 3 is how do we make sure that we're certainly finding ways where we can to increase grocery capacity within the power that we have in this case. But most importantly, adding ways to say, how do you expand available retail options? So whether that's simply looking for existing providers of things like sporting goods that can be brought into the city of Madison. I know a suggestion brought up in the steering committee was finding partnerships between local businesses and the businesses in the community that have night shifts, find ways to say how to make sure that food's available for workers. But then also finding ways to say, hey, you have some really neat community spaces, particularly in downtown. Can you host pop-up shops and find ways to introduce retail and food options in the community that might be unique or new? And so that's what goal number 3 is focused on. So goal number 4 of this section, integrate economic competitiveness approaches and practices to local economic development efforts, focusing on key clusters for development. It's a lot of fancy words for saying, how do we continue to build on great work happening at LAIC and offer more data as far as the cluster mapping that's available out there. One challenge that we ran into as we were building the economic base analysis for this plan is that the typical initiative you might look to, the US Cluster Mapping Initiative, only has data at a county level, which is fair, but that data was discontinued after 2017. And so there's ways to potentially gather that data anew, And there are partners in the region who may be able to assist with this. But really, again, it's really focusing on, as Brooke was sharing, there are very critical needs that need to be addressed in economic development. How do we make sure that we're thinking about it, and especially in a city context? How do we make sure that we have some of these cluster maps, these industry gatherings that can focus on what are the top industries, and we'll share this in the folder plan when we get to early June, but some areas that'll show up in that research. You'll look at some really key clusters that are not surprising. There's a very heavy ag manufacturing, parts manufacturing cluster here in the community. There's quite a few local clusters that are very strong. In particular, we'll talk about one of them, which is healthcare. There's also, again, some emerging clusters that are showing up in things like technology consulting. So probably in some ways can thank the fact that we have DSU in the community for some of that, but also you have a very uniquely diversified workforce. So how do we make sure that those industries that are strong, that have strong base here, how do we continue to support them? And a lot of that work is already happening. How do we just continue to build on that with, I guess, essentially more data? That also in this case means how do we integrate with DSU's economic and research development service as well, knowing that they're also actively recruiting, not just in Madison, but also now with their new center in Sioux Falls. How are the partnerships that can be built there too? Goal number 5, invest in significant efforts to sustain and support local clusters critical to citizen well-being. A lot of words for saying, how do we continue to support healthcare in the community? So really at this point, knowing that we can see in the data that you have a very consistent healthcare local cluster, how do you continue to support the fact that you have one of the only things in the region that most communities would really envy in this case: hospital, skilled nursing facility, residential care for developmentally disabled. You have a variety of local providers. You have that all here. That's not common. So how do we continue to sustain that and bring partners together and convene so we understand, particularly around workforce, how to make sure that we're able to share and make sure that our economic development strategy follows that. The other side of this is really focusing on how does that promotion of your unique healthcare situation contribute to your communication strategy. So when you talk about the magic of Madison, one of the things brought up in that process by those who share it is the fact that you have that very unique combination of healthcare systems. You can really live a full life from birth to death, for lack of a better way of saying it, in Madison because of the healthcare system you have. So how do we promote that more frequently in communications? Last goal here, actually, that's the last goal of that section. The last 2 themes are really focusing on quality of life and then, in a sense, a different kind of quality of life, which is belonging and safety. When we talk about enhancing quality of life, we're talking about a higher potential for retail, entertainment, and recreational opportunities. So goal 1, maybe not something that is a new concept, but maybe more just enhancing capacity. Goal 1 is establishing or enhancing existing business improvement district financial capacity so that it can support a specific set of FTEs for downtown. In this case, potentially through the Madison Chamber of Commerce. So really the focus of goal number 1 is how do we make sure that, knowing that the constant feedback coming from citizens, not just through this, but also the downtown master plan, is how do we enhance our capacity for promoting and making our downtown a destination? And so goal 1 is really focusing on establishing more capacity for that, and particularly trying to find ways to add FTEs so that we can focus on the downtown promotion. Again, I don't expect that it would be a standalone institution. I would expect it to be a partnership or a part of the Madison Chamber of Commerce. And I think the chamber, especially talking with Eric, I think he understands this too, that this is a priority that citizens are sharing. There's ways for us to say, if we can enhance that financial capacity, let's focus on that. That then would ultimately lead to, in this case, a focus on how do we continue to build a downtown core, more comments about food options, for example. But then again, setting standards for downtown buildings and building upon the events that are available downtown for citizens. Goal number 2, connect residents of Lake Madison, Lake Herman with downtown Madison, Madison Community Center. So there are governance committees specifically at Lake Herman, or not Lake Herman, sorry, Lake Madison. How do we make sure that we're integrating them into city-based activities, but then also the activities of the chamber? And then I know LAIC is very heavily involved in the process as well. So finding ways to connect residents through
community programming, but then also looking again, I know it's a challenging process as well, but looking at what is feasibility, if possible, of a recreational trail system, knowing that that's been raised by those citizens. I know that that's a challenging endeavor, so I understand focuses on feasibility rather than saying we're going to build a bike trail. So that's goal number 2. Goal number 3, support, sustain, and increase in arts and entertainment activity in Madison. One of the local economic clusters that's been in some decline recently through data is your local arts and entertainment cluster. And so some of this may just simply be a pattern of time. It might be a pattern of also think about processes for how do we fund institutions like the Madison Area Arts Council. It may be a case of dealing with some of those losses potentially coming out of, say, 2008. So what this is focused on is how do we increase local arts, theater, and entertainment, looking at feasibility options, what are options for placement of murals, sculptures, other street art forms when we think about downtown Madison master plan, but then also thinking about what are ways to draw folks into Madison through this type of activity. Last theme, we're almost there, folks. Theme number 5, build a culture of belonging for all citizens. This is really built on the feedback coming from the community saying they find Madison to be a really safe place to live. What I find most helpful and maybe something to kind of ponder, the ESL community, English as a second language community, really felt this was a calm and safe place to live. And their ratings of satisfaction with the community were off the charts, high. It was really something to behold. And so this really builds on that, frankly. And so goal number 1 is continuing to enhance accessibility of translation services. Much of that is already happening. So how do we continue to build on that and make sure that there's a central community hub for accessing those services? Again, through MadisonSouthDakota.com or a different site, whatever that site might be. But again, finding ways to say, how do we continue to build our capacity for making those folks feel included by translating documents where we can, or finding ways to partner with local organizations that may be able to provide additional translation services. Goal number 2, create a culture of belonging within the city of Madison through emphasis on training, education, and advancement opportunities. Really, this goal is focused on the city itself, but also offering those opportunities to other partners through the strategic plan. So how do we make sure that city employees continuously match and represent the community that we're serving, but also find ways to best serve them through their work? So how do we make sure that there is continued availability of training, as well as advancement opportunities in the city that match that? Last goal for the night. Complete a community resource needs assessment with the nonprofit sector. How do we make sure that we're elevating our nonprofit sector to the best of its ability? And the first recommended strategy is establishing a partnership with Interlakes United Way to complete a community needs assessment. So getting a little bit deeper into what are the resource needs of the community and how is the nonprofit sector currently doing that right now. And that, folks, is the general outline of the strategic plan for the city of Madison. So that said, in every single strategy, you'll see an owner. If you have any questions about those owners, the partners that are involved, any specific strategy, I'm very happy to help. I think the biggest thing I just say is this is still in draft form, so we're still open to suggestion and edit. Want to make sure that we gave you at least the overview of what's been put together, and so you know that your taxpayer dollars are being put to good work in this case. So thanks, everybody.
Very good. Questions or comments?
Covers a lot of ground, but the city government covers a lot of ground, so it makes sense. A lot of good things in here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments?
I would comment that obviously there's a lot of information in here, take some time to absorb it. We do have a 5 Monday month, so that means we have 3 weeks before our next commission meeting. So I'd ask you to look through it in your spare time, not just for what's to hear or what might be missing, but this is a lot of, I think, great recommendations from past, and we've hired them to provide this to us. But you as elected officials can look at it and say, I don't agree with doing this in the next 3 years or at all, whatever the case is. And whatever gets put in this plan from a staff point of view, we'll of course continue to stay connected with you, but we're gonna view that as our directive moving forward for the next 3 years of things we want to accomplish. So if it's in there, we're gonna start working on it. So if there's something that you have questions on, you can ask myself, you can ask Eric. If there's something you disagree with, we want to hear about that too. And I'll expect all that feedback by 8 AM tomorrow. I'm good.
I just appreciate the fact that you guys really engaged a lot of partners into this. And I think that was what we got out of this was well worth what we paid, in my opinion. I just think that we needed to have some vision and direction as we continue to grow in this community, and this really did a good job of kind of encompassing all of that. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And I like the method, you know, in our discussions and that you reached out to people who typically aren't reached out to and asked, you know, Howard, where are you? What are your thoughts, you know? And there's always people who are willing to come forward, you know, and step up to the plate. But there's also those who hold back, you know, and so that was really nice, you know, with the way this process went and all the different people that, you know, that you got input from. So. All right, any other questions? All right, well, thank you.
Thank you.
We look forward to seeing the final plan. Okay. All right, number 4, update on the 2023 infrastructure improvement projects. Is this Brian?
It is, yep, with the spring here, construction has resumed, and so Ryan will give us an update of what's going on.
Picture speaks 1,000 words.
Thank you.
You want a copy of the other? I know you guys have to be honest. Okay. Well, thanks for the opportunity to come and just kind of share what we have going on in the construction projects. It's ever changing, so again, appreciate that. Starting off in the packets with Northwest 9th Street Union Avenue project, Winter Contracting LLC is the prime contractor on that project. And they, along with their subcontractors, are completed nearly all of the curb and gutter on phase 1. Phase 1 would be that area between Highland Avenue and Chicago Avenue. Northwestern Energy has been on site and they continue to work ahead of Winter Contracting. So far, they've been very, very responsive in getting their gas lines out of the way, and that's helped the project immensely. Zacharias Construction is the subcontractor doing the roadway preparation. They're very near having that final grade. It's just a little bit of curb and gutter left that's kind of in their way. The rains we got over the weekend have kind of pushed back paving slightly, but we anticipate paving could happen next week, early next week, maybe Tuesday. Don't quote me on that, but that's kind of what we targeted. So once that paving is complete and school is out, Winter will jump over to phase 2 and begin work likely on the easternmost section, which would be phase 2A. And then some boulevard restoration and some sidewalk work may remain on that phase 1, but then that would be open to traffic. Traffic control and access management are a large component of any project, but they're absolutely critical on this one. And so we just want to thank the residents that have been affected thus far and thank the residents in advance for their patience as we move forward on this very important project. It's going to be challenging, but we're going to do our best to try to accommodate landowners with access. Phase 1A is the next project in the packet. Phase 1A was pretty much completed in 2020 and 2021 for the most part, but there's a punch list that's outstanding. Met with the contractor today on that punch list. It was a very good meeting. We painted out areas that need to be replaced. The reason this has gotten kicked so far in advance, being that it was mostly complete in 20 and 21, is because of the amount of workload that they had on phase 1B. They put most of their focus on that, and this one just kind of, has been waiting. So we anticipate impact to the residents to be minor amongst the remaining work. But deadline for completion of all this work is June 15th. And we anticipate that will be done. Next project, we'll go into phase 1B, same contractor, J&J Earthworks. They completed all the utility work. And then this is in the northwest part of town, it'll be from 5th Street to 9th, and then roughly Union to Kansas Avenue. They do have some of the pavement done. Well, I should say pavement started. That handout that I just handed out kind of has a color coded chart on what has been done and what remains. The bottom lift of asphalt was placed on 5th Street from West Avenue to Liberty, and they put a bottom lift on Chicago from 8th to 9th, and a bottom lift on Chicago and 7th. When those top lifts are installed, we'll have roughly 11 blocks left to be paved. All of those streets were pretty much ready to pave in November. We just ran out of season. It just got too cool. So it shouldn't take as long to peel back the temporary surfacing. We call them blue tops. There's blue tops that are still visible, and then the contractor can grade those blue tops in preparation for asphalt. Don't have a date when that'll be paved, but I would anticipate around the first week in June to have all that paved. Next project is phase 2. Halmy Inc. is the prime contractor. We haven't seen the amount of activity on this phase that we've seen on the Northwest 9th or phase 1A, 1B. But they have far less to do. So remaining work there is primarily surface restoration where items have been identified that need to be fixed. And then we have boulevard restoration and reseeding where necessary. I received a number of phone calls on this project, people concerned if their yard is going to get done, and it certainly is. Everything that's been disturbed will either, get brand new topsoil imported in and new seeding or be redone. Similar to the prior, this has a agreed upon June 15th completion date. The water tower, we haven't had any work resumed on the water tower yet, but the plan will be to paint the tower on the ground in the spring. And then they'll jack the tank up, do the final welding, do the final painting, and then they'll do some site work and some interior work to the tower. Final completion will be the fall, probably around November. And then the last page in the handout, I just wanted to touch on a couple of upcoming projects. We'll be looking to bid out what we're calling segment 3 quite soon. We have the review letter back from the Department of Ag and Natural Resources. So we'll be able to go forward with bidding that. That area is on Roosevelt, Northeast 8th, Northeast 6th, and then on Maplewood Avenue. And then the other project I wanted to point out for this year is cured in place pipe projects. Those are shown in orange and green on here. This would be lining of the sanitary sewer pipes. And we would look to bid that out fairly soon as well. From there in 2024, we've identified a couple projects that we plan to do. Union Avenue and Highland Avenue and 4th Street. That segment 5 Highland Avenue and 4th Street will split into 2 years. So that will linger into the 2025 season along with the Highway 34 one. So that's kind of our projects in a nutshell, and I stand by for any questions. And if none, I just again want to say I appreciate, I think I've talked to you all at one time or another about the struggles that we've had and the good things that we've had, and you've been very supportive, and we certainly appreciate that.
What are we doing with the old tower on the west side of town when no longer using
Yeah.
the water tower?
There was a plan at one time to take that down, and now I don't know that there's any hurry to do that. AT&T has some antennas up there, Verizon has some towers up there. Potentially you could take down the tank and leave the superstructure up. I don't know that there's any hurry to tear that down. Not sure.
Are we gonna permanently disconnect it from the water system?
It will be, yeah.
I'm a little worried that as that silver paint flakes off, it's gonna look horrible in a few years.
Yeah, yeah,
It will
so,
reflect poorly on our water system.
yeah, there would be quite a bit of maintenance that would still have to happen. Perhaps some of that rent that we get from those utility, or those, cell phone companies could offset that, I'm not sure.
Do you know if there's been any serious conversation about removing the tank and leaving the legs?
Not serious conversation. When Brad Lawrence was the utility director, he and I had discussed it. I also approached Banner about that to see if, you know, they had any, advisement on that, if the tank should come down or stay up, and, we haven't really taken a serious look at it.
I wonder if there'd be any desire by those cell phone towers to maybe relocate to our other towers over the years.
Yeah, potentially, yeah.
There is a tremendous amount of underground infrastructure for both the city and those other companies, so it would be a major cost expense in that to move things.
Yeah, it's gonna start looking really ugly as that paint flicks off.
What did it cost?
Hopefully I won't be on the commission.
What did it cost us to paint it last time? Do you remember that?
I don't, so I couldn't even give you a ballpark.
Yeah. You know, and then, when we had that tower inspected before and that inside, they said the tower itself, had another 35 years of use, based on its structural condition, for holding water. But it's not at the same height as the rest of it, and that's the issue that we ran into. Plus, our growth is going to the south. And that doesn't have the height needed, and that, to service to the south. And so, but,
Yeah, it's a
you know,
tough deal. It's, I mean, it's a shame that it's about 20 feet too short, because we kind of kept using it.
but as far as taking the tank down, if we took the tank down and left the legs there, that's what the majority of the electronics are attached to, and
I just,
so.
I think Brad looked into it a little bit, and I don't know if we get an engineer to sign off saying that they thought it'd be secure if you modify it like that. I don't think anybody would touch that project. And that.
They would for a
that silver, the silver paint flakes off that tower. It just looks god awful. Bad deal.
But at this point in time, it's a necessary location. So. But I hear what you're saying as well. All right. Any questions at all for Ryan?
Where are they starting to fog seal that project?
I don't have a date on that yet. There's many communities that are involved in that, and I don't know where they'll start or anything, so. We'll get advanced warning, but probably won't find out for a month or so.
And generally, it's closer to the fall, and that's preferred because our streets department spends a lot of work prepping those streets, making sure they're ready for the fog seal, doing, cracks and other improvements as well, so we need some time to prepare.
Gary, do you have anything you want to add? to this?
I just.
If you wouldn't mind coming forward for the benefit of those that are.
Yeah, we usually,
Thank you.
we spend most of the summer getting those ready, so generally August, September, we're ready. So this year, I think we're pretty close on a lot of those already, so there's a lot of new streets in there that they'll be covered. I mean, you always wanna seal them up good, so. Yeah, never have a lack of work to do, but we just in that particular area that we're in, we're pretty good shape. So.
How's the citywide credit go?
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, we're down a little bit this year. We went from, I think we had 125 loads last year. We're down to 80 some loads this year, but we ran 2 garbage trucks too, so that changed things a little bit. We hadn't really split things up too, though. We had a skid steer behind a garbage truck, 2 garbage trucks, 1 skid steer for each one. So we threw everybody we had at it, and we were done again by Thursday, and no ratio on Friday. So
Very good. Awesome. Another question that will come from the public, all of us at one point or another is, How are we doing at looking at potholes this in the,
We're back to them again, yeah, so we just took that week off and now we're back at it again, so. Getting caught up a little bit here and there, but. Definitely plenty of work out there.
anyone else questions? Okay. Thank you both. Thank you. Do we have any public comment? No public comment? Under announcements, our next regular commission meeting is Monday, June 5th, 5:30 p.m. And number two, we have board openings on the Madison Housing and Redevelopment Commission. There's a vacancy for a 5-year term expiring in February 2028. And on the Planning Commission, 2 openings with 3-year terms. So if you have an interest in any of those, and that, contact Jameson at our offices. Okay, if there isn't anything else, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you, everyone. Next one,
Good.
You come up with magic medicine?
Plates, that'll be-